Winter, 1939. The forests of Finland were buried under endless white. The cold wasn't just weather, it was a weapon. Snow packed thick across the land, frozen rivers glimmering like glass, silence stretching for miles. But somewhere in that silence, death was moving. Quiet, invisible, waiting. On the border between Finland and the Soviet Union, a war had erupted, the Winter War. The Red Army had crossed in with tanks, planes, and over 500,000 men. Finland had barely 300,000. No allies, no mercy. Just frozen wilderness and determination. And in those frozen woods, one man would become a legend. His name? Simo Häyhä. He wasn't a general. He wasn't famous before the war. He was a farmer. A quiet man from a small village near Rautjärvi, eastern Finland. He had spent his life hunting rabbits, chopping wood, tending to his fields, and practicing shooting in the forests behind his home. But when the Soviet Union invaded his country, Simo put down the axe and picked up his rifle. He wasn't tall, barely 5'3", but his aim was absolute. Every day, he trained in silence, shooting targets hundreds of meters away with no fancy optics. He didn't believe in scopes. The glare of sunlight on glass could give away your position. Instead, he relied on iron sights, simple, raw, unforgiving. Just a man and his rifle. When war began, the temperature dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. The Soviets thought they would crush Finland in weeks. They were wrong. The Finnish soldiers knew the forests like a second skin. They moved through snow silently, dressed in white camouflage, using skis to glide between trees. Simo was assigned to the 6th Company, Infantry Regiment 34, at the Kola front, a place that would become the stage for his legend. It was there he would become known as the White Death. At first, no one paid much attention to him. He spoke little, moved fast, and rarely missed. But soon, the men around him noticed something strange. Wherever Simo was sent, the enemy stopped advancing. He would crawl into position before dawn, while the world was still blue with frost. He'd pack snow in front of him to keep his rifle steady. He'd put snow in his mouth so the vapor of his breath wouldn't be seen. Then he would wait. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for an entire day. And when a Soviet soldier appeared in his sights, Simo didn't hesitate. One shot. Clean. Cold. Final. He would stay in the same spot until nightfall, frozen in the snow, body numb, skin burning, but he never complained. When asked later how he managed to fight through the unbearable cold, he said, "I did what I was told, as well as I could." In the first few weeks, his confirmed kills climbed into the hundreds. Soviet soldiers began whispering about a phantom in the snow. They called him Belaya Smrt, the White Death. They tried to hunt him down. They sent counter-snipers. They shelled forests where they thought he might be hiding. But he never moved until the mission was done. He always came back, silent, calm, rifle clean. The Soviet command could not understand how one man could cause such chaos. Entire units refused to move through certain forests because of him. Men vanished without a sound, shot clean through the head from hundreds of meters away. No one ever saw where the bullet came from. He became a myth, a ghost story told around fires. And while the Soviets were sending in tanks and bombers, Finland had Simo, one man in white, who would bring death to anyone who stepped into his line of sight. By the time his name reached the Finnish High Command, Simo Häyhä had already become a living legend. The official record would later credit him with over 500 confirmed kills in less than 100 days. The unofficial count, even higher, But behind those numbers was something more chilling. He didn't do it for fame. He never wrote books. He didn't brag. He didn't speak much about the war at all. To him, it was simple. The enemy invaded his land, and he stopped them. At Kola, one Finnish officer famously said, "Kola kestää." Kola holds. And it did, because Simo Häyhä was there. When asked how he achieved such impossible accuracy, he simply said, "Practice." For weeks, the Soviets threw everything they had at Kola: artillery, tanks, entire divisions. But one by one, their advance slowed, because every time they moved, men fell dead before they could even raise their rifles. The snow itself seemed haunted. And inside that snow, hidden behind branches, face wrapped in frost, finger resting steady on the trigger, was a small Finnish farmer whose name would soon echo through history. This was not the story of luck, not of chance. It was skill. Pure, relentless skill. The Winter War was brutal, short, and unforgiving. But within those few months, Simo Häyhä became more than a soldier. He became a symbol that one man with enough resolve could stop an army. And as the Soviet troops began to fear the White Forests, they started calling out into the emptiness. "Where is he? Who is he?" But Simo never answered. He let his rifle do the talking. The year was 1939. The Winter War had just begun. The Soviet Union believed it would be over in 2 weeks. They had tanks, planes, and millions of men. Finland had rifles, courage, and the cold. And deep in the frozen forest of Kola, one man was rewriting the rules of warfare. Simo Häyhä, small, silent, relentless. He woke before dawn every day, ate a piece of bread, and skied into the woods alone. The frost bit through his skin, the wind howled through the trees, but he didn't care. He had one purpose: to stop the Red Army from taking his homeland. Simo's weapon was the M2830 rifle, the Finnish variant of the Mosin Nagant. No scope, just iron sights. He preferred it that way, because in the snow, sunlight could reflect off glass, exposing your position. He didn't need magnification. His vision was precise, his hands steady, his breathing trained. He always chose his shooting spot carefully, behind trees or buried in snowbanks he built by hand. He'd flatten the snow in front of him so the rifle's muzzle blast wouldn't lift loose powder and give him away. He'd even put snow in his mouth to hide the visible breath vapor. He was patient, the kind of patience only hunters and killers understand. He could wait motionless for hours. If no enemy appeared, he'd stay until night, listening to artillery in the distance, unmoving, calm. The forest was his home, the cold, his ally. When the Soviets advanced through the trees, they moved in groups, confident in their numbers. They didn't know they were walking into one man's range. A single shot cracked through the air. One man fell. Then silence. Minutes passed. Then another shot. Another soldier dropped. By the time the Soviets hit the ground to take cover, they realized they couldn't see their attacker. There was no muzzle flash, no movement, just white. Every day, Simo returned with results. His comrades began keeping count, and the numbers grew faster than anyone could believe. 20 kills one day, 30 the next, sometimes more. The Soviet troops began to whisper about him. They said he could see through snow, that he never missed. They called him Belaya Smert, the White Death. Soon, the name spread through the ranks. Entire Soviet units refused to advance in daylight near Kola. Commanders ordered artillery strikes into empty forests just to calm their soldiers' nerves. But Simo was never there. He moved constantly, unpredictable, invisible. He wasn't driven by hatred or thrill. He wasn't a bloodthirsty man. He was simply efficient, the perfect soldier for the terrain. He once said he never thought about how many he killed, only that he was protecting his country. His skill came from years of hunting in the same forests he now defended. As a boy, he hunted birds and foxes, and he learned that hesitation means failure. Every movement mattered. Every sound could betray you. He brought those lessons to the battlefield. The Finnish officers began to notice his impact. A single man slowing down entire Soviet advances. They awarded him honors. He didn't celebrate. He went back into the snow the next morning and continued shooting. By mid-January 1940, Simo Häyhä had become the Red Army's nightmare. He operated entirely alone. No spotter, no assistant. Just him and his rifle. The Soviets grew desperate. They sent counter-snipers to hunt him down. One by one, they disappeared. Each killed before they could even fire a shot. Then they tried artillery. They shelled forests, hills, snowbanks, anywhere they thought he might be. Trees splintered, ground erupted, explosions echoed across the valley. But when the smoke cleared, he was still there. One Finnish soldier later said, "We sometimes heard the Soviets shouting, begging him to show himself." But Simo never answered. He didn't talk much. Not during the war, not after. The only sound people remembered was the faint click of his rifle bolt, followed by silence. By February 1940, official Finnish reports credited him with over 500 confirmed kills, all within about 100 days. That's an average of 5 soldiers every single day, in temperatures that froze exposed skin in minutes. When he wasn't sniping, he joined close-range firefights with his Suomi KP-31 submachine gun, cutting through Soviet patrols who got too close. His comrades said that when Simo switched from sniper to close combat, his precision didn't change. Every burst of gunfire was deliberate. Every shot landed. His legend grew so large that even his own commanders began to doubt it. Until they verified each report, kill by kill, through spotters and patrol logs. The numbers were real. By late February, his story reached the Soviet High Command. They were furious. They ordered entire divisions to find him. None succeeded, because Simo Häyhä wasn't fighting a normal war. He was fighting the land itself, using it to become something else, something invisible, something feared. Even the Finns began to look at him differently, not just as a soldier, but as a force of nature. He didn't brag, he didn't pose for photos, he just nodded when asked how he managed to survive so many missions. His answer was always the same. "I practiced. And I stayed still." He was 34 years old. He had no wife, no children, no fame. Just a rifle, the snow, and his mission. The kind of man who didn't need words, only action. The Soviets started to believe he was not human. They said he must have used witchcraft or been blessed by something supernatural. But the truth was simpler. He was just better. He understood that war isn't about rage. It's about patience, silence, and precision. In war, some men survive by luck. Simo Häyhä survived because he earned it, one shot at a time. And as February turned into March, the Soviets began to lose patience. They couldn't kill the White Death. So they made one final attempt. One sniper, one bullet. A shot that would change his life forever. By mid-January 1940, the Soviet command was desperate. Hundreds of soldiers had vanished in the Kola woods, one by one, silently picked off. Their bodies were often found half buried in snow, faces pale from the cold and fear, with a single bullet hole clean through the head. No sound, no warning, only death. The Soviets began calling him Belaya Smert, the White Death. His name spread through the ranks like a ghost story soldiers told in whispers at night. They said he wasn't human, that he could disappear into the snow. They said he didn't need sleep, that he could see through trees. Entire units were afraid to move forward. When a branch snapped or the wind shifted, they froze, afraid that the next sound they heard would be the crack of his rifle. Simo Häyhä didn't think of himself as a legend. He was a hunter, doing what he had learned since childhood. Moving slowly, breathing in rhythm with the forest, pulling the trigger only when certain. Every day, he would crawl into the snow at dawn, pack the snow around his rifle barrel to muffle recoil, and lie there for hours without moving. He didn't use scopes because sunlight reflecting off the glass could reveal his position. Just iron sights. Pure skill. He always struck from invisible ranges. His preferred distance was 150 to 400 meters. Not too far, not too close. Far enough to stay hidden, close enough to make every shot count. He didn't waste bullets. In one day, he could kill over 24 Soviet soldiers. Each confirmed kill was logged by his unit, though the true number was likely far higher. The Soviets tried to fight back. They began sending counter-snipers, the best marksmen they had, to hunt him down. But none returned. Each time, they went silent within a day. The Finns would later find their bodies in the snow, each with a single round through the head, the work of the same man they were sent to kill. In frustration, Soviet officers ordered heavy artillery bombardments on suspected sniper positions. They fired hundreds of shells into the forests. Trees exploded, snow turned black with smoke, and yet Simo would crawl out alive, brush the frost off his white camouflage, and move again. One morning, the Soviets tried a new tactic, using entire platoons as bait. They would advance slowly, hoping the sniper would fire and reveal his location. Simo didn't. He waited until they believed it was safe. When they began to relax, he started firing, picking them off from the back ranks first, sowing panic. The men scattered, unsure which direction to face. By the time artillery was called again, he was already gone. Every time his rifle cracked, the Finnish troops nearby would smile grimly. They knew it meant another Soviet soldier had fallen, another step back for the invading army. His commanders began to see his value not only as a soldier, but as a symbol. His presence gave hope to men who were outnumbered 50 to 1. As the Soviets' fear deepened, their tactics grew chaotic. Soldiers refused to enter wooded areas. Officers tried to motivate them by promising rewards for anyone who could kill the White Death. Posters were made, but no one ever collected the bounty. At night, Simo slept in small dugouts carved from snowbanks, his rifle always within reach. His uniform was soaked in frozen sweat. His breath fogged the air as he replayed each day's hunt in silence. He didn't celebrate his kills. For him, this was survival. For Finland, for his brothers in arms, for his home. By February, the Soviet army had lost thousands. Morale collapsed in several divisions. Commanders began to believe that one man was responsible for the endless stream of casualties near Kola. They were right. In those weeks, Simo Häyhä's kill count reached over 500. Some say it was closer to 700, when unconfirmed reports were included. Yet not once did he fire out of rage. Every shot was measured, every kill deliberate. The snow had become his ally. The trees were his cover. The silence was his weapon. But war has a way of turning even legends into targets. And soon, the hunter would become the hunted. By early March 1940, the Winter War had entered its final stretch. The temperature had dropped below -40 degrees Celsius. Even the air burned the lungs. Finland's small army was exhausted, but it had done what the world thought impossible. It had stopped the Soviet advance. And in the frozen woods near Kola, one man had become both the shield and the sword. Simo Häyhä had been fighting almost non-stop for 100 days. His face was pale, his beard frosted white, his eyes sharp from endless days staring through iron sights. Every muscle in his body ached. He hadn't seen his family since the war began, and sleep came only in fragments. Yet every dawn he returned to his post, because as long as the Soviets were coming, he would be waiting. The Red Army, humiliated and bleeding, was furious. Commanders sent reconnaissance patrols, mortars, even tanks to clear the area. Every time, they came back fewer. And when they tried again, Simo would already be somewhere else, silent, patient, invisible. But the Soviets learned. They began studying his patterns, mapping where his shots were most often fired. They started watching the trees, looking for signs of snow that seemed disturbed, searching for glints of metal or the faint outlines of a shooter's nest. The hunter had become the prize. On March 6, 1940, the forest around Kola was deathly quiet. The sky was gray, and the snow reflected the light like glass. Simo was positioned near a small ridge overlooking an open field. He'd taken down several Soviet soldiers earlier that day. He knew they'd return for revenge. He lay flat on his stomach, his rifle steady, the snow packed tight around him. Hours passed in silence. Then, a flicker. Movement among the trees about 200 meters away. He didn't move. The wind shifted slightly. Another flicker, then stillness. His instincts told him it was a trap. But before he could relocate, a sharp flash erupted from the opposite direction. A single bullet tore through the air and struck his lower left jaw. The force threw him backward into the snow. His rifle dropped from his hands. He couldn't see. His face had exploded with pain. Half his jaw was gone, his left cheek shattered. His tongue filled his mouth with blood. The snow beneath him turned red. Simo was still conscious. He could hear the Soviets shouting in the distance. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. For the first time in months, the man known as the White Death was completely exposed. A group of Finnish soldiers found him shortly after, crawling toward their position, his face barely recognizable. They thought he was dead until he tried to speak. They carried him out of the woods, his body limp, his face hanging open from the wound. When they reached the medical camp, the doctor took one look at him and shook his head. "No chance," he whispered. They placed Simo on a stretcher beside the others who hadn't survived the day. But he kept breathing. Shallow, rattling breaths. Surgeons worked for hours. They removed the shattered bone, cleaned the wound, and rebuilt what they could. His jaw was destroyed, his left cheek gone. Yet somehow, his pulse held steady. For days he drifted in and out of consciousness, hallucinating snow and gunfire, faces of comrades long gone. On March 13, 1940, 7 days after his injury, he woke to the sound of distant church bells. The nurse beside him told him the war was over. The Winter War had ended. Finland had survived. Simo tried to speak, but his mouth couldn't form words. He wrote one sentence on a scrap of paper. "Did we win?" The nurse nodded. "Yes, we held them off." It was then that he closed his eyes and finally slept, without fear. Simo spent months recovering in hospital. His face was permanently disfigured, his jawbone reconstructed with metal, his left side frozen in a half-smile. For the rest of his life, he would carry the scar that nearly killed him. But his spirit never broke. When asked years later how he managed to survive, he gave no speech, no philosophy. Just a simple line, "I did what I was told, as well as I could." The Soviets never learned his exact location that day, nor did they ever confirm who fired the shot. Some claimed it was one of their elite snipers, others said it was luck. What's certain is that even the bullet meant to end him couldn't. After his recovery, Simo returned to the quiet of rural Finland. He never sought fame, never exaggerated his record. Officially, he was credited with 505 confirmed kills, all with a bolt-action rifle and no scope. Unofficially, estimates reached over 700. The bullet that hit him should have ended his life, but instead, it sealed his legacy. The White Death had fallen, but he had already done enough to become immortal. The Winter War ended in March 1940. Finland had lost territory, but it had kept its independence. Against one of the largest armies on Earth, a nation of just over 3 million people had stood its ground. And at the heart of that defense was one quiet farmer, Simo Häyhä, the man the Soviets called the White Death. After his injury, Simo spent over a year in hospitals. Doctors rebuilt his jaw piece by piece, performing surgeries that tested the limits of wartime medicine. When he finally looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize the man staring back. The left side of his face was sunken and scarred. His mouth curved into a permanent half-smile, frozen by the wound that almost ended his life. But his eyes, cold, sharp, unbroken, were the same. When reporters asked if he regretted what he'd done, he didn't hesitate. "I only did what I was told to do, and what I had to do." No pride, no remorse, just the truth of a soldier who had seen too much. Simo didn't return to fame or parades. He returned to the forest. After being discharged, he bought a small farm near Ruokolahti, where he hunted, raised his dogs, and lived quietly. Those who knew him said he was kind, soft-spoken, and almost impossibly humble. He never talked about the war unless asked directly, and even then, his answers were short. "I did my duty." To the Finnish people, though, he was more than just a soldier. He was a symbol of resilience. When the government began documenting wartime history, his name appeared again and again. The sniper who had done the impossible. Schools taught about the battles of Kola. Veterans spoke his name with quiet respect. Even the Soviets, years later, admitted he was one of the most feared and effective snipers ever recorded. In Red Army archives, his kill record was verified, and officers described him as the invisible terror of Kola. Simo's method was pure discipline. No scope, because glass reflected sunlight. No unnecessary shots, no emotion, just precision. He used his M28-30 rifle, a simple, bolt-action weapon, to deliver one of the deadliest performances in military history. The weapon itself now rests in a museum, a silent witness to what one man can do when pushed to the edge of human endurance. He never saw himself as a killer. To him, it was survival, defending his homeland. He once said, "War is not a pleasant thing, but who would not defend his home when it is attacked?" Decades passed, He lived through another war, the Continuation War, though he never returned to the front lines. He was offered positions in the Finnish army, but turned them down, preferring the peace of his dogs and hunting trips over the noise of gunfire. He became an expert moose hunter, known locally for his uncanny accuracy. Hunters who went out with him said he never missed. Even in his old age, his hands were steady, his eye unshaken. In 1998, when he was 92 years old, a reporter asked him how he managed to become the most efficient sniper in history. His answer was short and calm. Practice. He died peacefully on April 1, 2002, in a veterans' nursing home in Hämeenä, Finland, just 1 week before his 97th birthday. He lived through 2 wars, multiple surgeries, and decades of quiet solitude. When he passed, Finland mourned him like a national hero. At his funeral, soldiers, veterans, and citizens gathered in silence. There were no speeches, no loud ceremonies, just the sound of a rifle volley fired into the cold Finnish air. 3 shots, a final echo for the man who once defined what it meant to be precise, patient, and deadly. Today, Simo Häyhä's story is told all over the world, in documentaries, books, military academies, and digital archives. Modern snipers study his methods. His tactics are still taught in sniper schools as examples of endurance, discipline, and stealth. But what truly sets him apart isn't the number of lives he took. It's the life he lived after. He never glorified war. He never sought revenge or fame. He just lived quietly, as a man who had done his duty and carried its weight with dignity. The legend of the White Death isn't about killing. It's about survival. It's about the will of a single man to hold his ground when everything around him was falling apart. It's the story of what happens when skill, discipline, and belief in one's homeland meet at the edge of human endurance. And long after the snow of Kola melted, his story remains frozen in time. A reminder that even in the darkest winters, one man's courage can shape history. If you found this story powerful, take a moment right now. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. There are more untold stories like this one. Real accounts of bravery, sacrifice, and survival that history almost forgot. Your support helps keep these stories alive, so we can continue exploring the moments that changed the world forever. Because history isn't just what happened, it's what we remember. And here, we remember it all.